From outlaws to hot rods, to reimaginings, to rally cars, to roof, to bespoke builds, it seems like everyone has their own thoughts about what their ideal incarnation of a 911 should look and drive like. And independent Porsche specialist RPM Technik is no exception. Its CSR programme began not with old air-cooled 911s, but with 996s, before moving on to 997s, like this one. This is chassis number 28, known as Snakebite. Based on a Gen 1 997, it represents RPM's current CSR thinking, and apparently its creation can be distilled into 3 strands.
They've got reconditioning, analogue and bespoke. So reconditioning, this went all the way back to bare metal, and they refreshed various parts on the car and then repainted it in the customer's choice of Brewster green, which I think you'll agree looks rather wonderful. It's a really dark, quite old-fashioned colour green, a bit like the British racing green you've seen on Jaguars of the 50s and 60s. Then there's analogue. So they've tried to enhance all the lovely interactive bits of this car to make it, well, more driver-focused.
That means marvellous things such as a mechanical limited slip diff, a lightweight clutch and flywheel, and a Stage 1 power upgrade to the engine that includes factory X51 improvements to the top end. In the arches you'll find appealing additions like KW suspension, uprated and adjustable anti-roll bars, poly bushing and adjustable eye-back lower arms. Meanwhile, the tactility of the interior is increased by bucket seats, a Momo wheel and a short shifter.
Then there's the bespoke element. So the customer can really choose exactly how, obviously, they want the car to look inside and out, but also how they want the car to feel. Do they want it more road orientated? Do they want it more track orientated? And that's where RPM gets Tim Harvey involved to help set the car up. Oh, and just to make every CSR stand out, they all get a ducktail, a carbon fibre one no less, taking 6 kilos off the rear end.
You'll also notice that this car has an Aero Kit front bumper and a GT3 rear bumper with a centre exit exhaust.
Before we talk about this specific car, I wanted to talk about the 997 in general, because I find it fascinating how different generations of 911, or other cars in fact, go in and out of fashion and popularity. The 997 is no longer the old 911, because now the 992 has come out, the 991 is now the old 911, and the 997 is a modern classic, I think.
Now, I've got a bit of a soft spot for 997s. They were the current 911 when I started out as a motoring journalist, and I just love the way they look and drive.
I think the size of the 997 is just so right. We've got this wonderful 6-speed manual gearbox, and of course hydraulically assisted power steering.
As good as electric systems are now, there is no doubt that the best hydraulic systems just keep up a more constant conversation.
This really does feel like an analogue 911. The fact that you just feel the push at the front, but then that lets you work the rear as well through the corner. And it's not at big speeds, it just feels so interactive all the time.
Before you all go rushing for the classifieds, it would be remiss of me not to mention the problems that some Gen 1 997s are afflicted by, namely bore scoring and failure of the intermediate shaft or IMS bearing. This is not the time to go into details, and it doesn't have to be a deal breaker, but it's worth flagging up.
All I'd say is just do your homework before you buy one.
But enough of 997s in general. What of this CSR Snakebite in particular, with all its modifications?
The end result is a car that I think is hugely appealing. The look of it is nicely understated. The paint is wonderful. The wheels, these HRE wheels which come from America, are forged wheels and they're not cheap. But in Vice Gold, they set the car off perfectly. Perhaps they're a little bit too turbo for my liking. I'm not quite sure. But of course, being bespoke, you could choose a more standard option if you'd like. The feel of the car to drive overall, well, they wanted something that was a bit more GT than a GT car, I suppose, because you might think this is a sort of a poor man's touring, but it's definitely not quite as edgy perhaps as a GT3. The engine sounds glorious, and with that lightened clutch and flywheel, it really does rev.
Power from the Carrera S's 3.8 litre flat six is up by about 30 brake horsepower to a very healthy 385. That's compared to 409 brake horsepower for the 3.6 in the similar era GT3. The response isn't quite as precise and sharp as a Metzger either, but in terms of torque it arguably feels every bit as strong, and there is still a very appealing character to this Carrera S engine.
It hasn't quite got the clarity in the way it revs or to the sound of it. It's just a little bit softer perhaps, but it's nonetheless a wonderful thing to use. It sounds really good actually in the mid-range. You don't have to rev it out to get the best sound out of it. The handling is definitely much sharper than a standard 997, but it's just got a lovely amount of grip. Enough, but certainly not too much. The damping is excellent from those KW dampers. Again, rounding off the bumps, but leaving you very much in contact with the road. I drove down to these roads today for 3 hours on the motorway, and it was absolutely fine. I will happily drive back again this evening. I want to just slow down for a moment and talk about the interior of this car, because I find it really interesting what they've done here. Obviously we have the Recaro seats and it's all been beautifully trimmed. You can still see sort of the marks of the fact that this is underneath a car that's done 120,000 miles, but they've made a great job of actually making this feel extremely modern. And I think it's just the little things. So the gear knob, the fact they've taken out the sat-nav and radio from here, so suddenly it looks like a 991 Touring with the PCM delete, and the steering wheel. You take those things out and suddenly it feels like a very, very modern car, except with a beautiful array of 5 completely analog dials. Incidentally, the reason that this car is called Snakebite is because originally it was going to be green outside and then trimmed purple on the inside, before somebody decided that was perhaps not a brilliant idea.
For those unfamiliar with the name, I should mention at this point that a snakebite is a type of drink. It is composed of half lager and half cider, and generally results in a sense of deep regret. Technically, to get the purple colour in the drink you need to add a dash of blackcurrant to make it a snakebite and black, which is also known as a diesel. I don't think CSR diesel would have sent out the right messages though.
Given all the work that has gone into this car, it's not surprising that it isn't cheap. Obviously it depends what you have done, but a CSR like this will set you back anywhere between 60 and 80,000 pounds. And the elephant in the room, I suppose, is the fact that a GT3 of the similar era could even cost you a bit less than that. However, the people that are buying these, they've almost certainly already got a GT3. They want something different. Perhaps they want that GT car feel with some rear seats, because although the seats have been deleted from this one, you could of course keep them back there.
And whereas you might feel guilty about putting too many miles on a GT3 or tampering with its originality, there is no such risk of remorse with one of these.
Overall, as with so many of these sort of bespoke builds, I suppose, I love the fact that they make you think, what would I do? Perhaps I'd get the Pasha seats instead of the Pepita Tartan. Perhaps I would go a bit more track focused. Perhaps I'd have it in mint green instead of Brewster green. Above all, it's made me want a 997 again. Perhaps with a few modifications though.